When we talked about the regular expression used in the proxy pass match directive, we found out that this directive is used for targeting specific URLs. In this next section, we are going to talk about what happens to the targeted URLs. So let's take a look at what's said right here. According to what's written over here, what this specifies is it specifies that the targeted URL is to be forwarded via Proxy FCGI using the fast CGI protocol to the port our PHP-FPM daemon is listening on. So this specifies an IP address and a port number. This IP address is on the same machine, and this port is the port that FCGI, its daemon, exists. Okay, so here they say this determines which fast CGI pool will serve requests proxied by this rule. Okay, the reason that this determines which fast CGI pool will serve requests proxied by this rule is because a pool for FCGI lives on a single machine and it listens on a port number. Okay, so this part over here determines which fast CGI pool will serve requests proxied by this rule. And this rule is the whole directive or the regular expression here, which is part of this whole directive. It all basically whittles down all the requests. It whittles them down to the ones that are going to be redirected to the daemon, FCGI, on this machine at this port number. And whenever we say this IP address and this port number, then we're also specifying a pool. So that's where the word pool comes in here. And if you've watched this series about PHP-FPM, you will find that there's other things that we mention about pools. And I've already talked about a pool is basically a group of PHP processes which exist on one machine, and basically they're managed all together for this machine. Okay, I apologize if that's not too clear, but I can't just keep explaining things over, so I'll just have to leave it at that. If you want to understand more about pools, look at the beginning part of this series of videos. The next section over here, we're going to be talking about the path to your document root. This is actually the path to your web server's configured document root. So if you're putting all your web files for your project in a particular directory, that directory has the path to your document root. And here it says important, this must exactly match the real file system location of your PHP files, because that is where the PHP-FPM daemon will look for them. PHP-FPM just interprets the PHP files passed to it. It is not a web server, nor does it understand your web server's namespace, virtual host layout, or aliases. Important. Read the above again. See, if this was just a regular request being handled by your web server, the web server knows the path to your document root. However, the requests which are being funneled to FCGI, this pool of PHP processes, they don't know anything about the configuration of your web server. So they need to know the exact location of your script in the file system. So you need to put the path to your document root. Okay, next we need to find out the $1. What is that? Okay, it's right up here. $1 expands to the entire URI from the original request minus the leading slash, because we already added that above. Okay, I'll use the URL up here as an example. This whole part right here is referred to as the URI part of the URL. Okay, so $1 will end up becoming the URI of that URL which got filtered to the pool of FCGI PHP processes. Now, how does it get there? I already talked about it when I talked about this up here. I said that this part, that's why we have the brackets around here, is because that's the part that's going to become $1. Okay, so we're done with that part. All right, next we're going to talk about the directory index directive. Here what it says is that a request for / directory will need to be mapped to a resource on the FCGI backend. All right, what they are really saying is that a request, a URL, which is a request, that does not specify a file. It just ends in a /. Okay, that request will need to be mapped to a resource on the FCGI backend. And when they say a resource, they're talking about a file. Okay, so if no file is specified, then there needs to be a file that gets passed to FCGI. Failure to address this may cause a blank response, commonly known as the white screen of death, especially if only a request URI containing the PHP expression is proxied, such as this example. The processing chain will first map a request for that directory to index.php or any in index.php file relative to the current request URI, then proxy to the PHP-FPM backend correctly. Okay, this is written in a way which is very confusing, so let me tell you what I have concluded it means based on a lot of contemplation. What this means is what I've said before, which is that when the client requests a URL, the web server will process it first before the proxy. Okay? So when the web server processes it and it receives a URL with no file specified, just a directory, it's going to add index.php or possibly a / index.php. And once it does that, then the proxy pass match will match it, and then it will take it to where it's supposed to go instead of receiving the white screen of death. So basically what this sentence here is telling us is what would happen if we actually use the directory index Apache directive. Okay, they are not telling us what would happen if they didn't use it. If they didn't use it, then obviously this proxy match wouldn't match anything because it doesn't match something unless it has the string .php in it. And if the URL didn't have any file at all, obviously it's not going to even have a .php in it. Okay, so that's when you would get the white screen of death. Okay, so that's what this means. All right, next here, remember I said there were two ways of, there are two ways of specifying the pool. One is the TCP socket IP and port approach, and the other is the Unix domain socket UDS approach. Okay, so this is what this section talks about, is instead of using FCGI here to specify the pool, here we are just specifying the socket for the pool using Unix instead of FCGI. And apparently, although this is the Unix domain socket approach, it looks like it's using the socket and FCGI. So I don't know really what the advantage would be. Okay? But it says, note that with this approach, the captured request URI $1 is not passed after the path. Okay? And I already talked about that. The other thing is, here it just tells you what this is. Basically, it's the word Unix, and then the path in the file system to the socket. Okay, so much about that. I'm not even going to be using this method because like it said here, you don't get to use the $1. proxy via handler. Okay, proxy via handler. That's basically a third way of doing it. And it's a way of doing it without using the directive proxy pass match. Okay? And basically this approach entails using a bunch of directives for the web server to accomplish the same thing. The first directive is this one, which specifies the FCGI pool, and it specifies that enable reuse should be on and max equals 10. And here is where you would specify the file rather than specifying it like this way up here, or this way up here with the $1. Okay. And then you would use either this, probably since I have the most recent version of the server, I would use this one. So this put all together basically does the same thing that proxy pass match does. Okay. But I think that supposedly this has an advantage to doing it this way. Let me read here. It says, with this approach, you can check for the existence of the source prior to proxying to the FPM backend. Okay, so that's one advantage. The other advantage is defining a worker will improve performance. I guess this method is called defining a worker. So it will improve for performance, and in this case, reuse the worker depending on support from the FCGI application. If you have enough idle workers, this would only improve the performance marginally. Okay, I just don't think I'm going to be using this way. Okay, so I can skip that. And that'll be it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to be implementing this example up here just so that I can test that this whole FCGI PHP-FPM thing actually works.